Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Blade Runner 4, I and Talon by K.W. Jeter. Chapter 13. So when do I get to meet this Urbenton guy? Who? At first, Iris thought that was supposed to be some kind of joke. The other person sitting on a folding chair in the galvanized metal shed was one of the crew that had captured her on top of the Tyrell Corporation ruins. She recognized him, even though it had been dark then, with nothing more than the cold stars breaking through the clouds and the beams of the searchlights glaring into her eyes. His had been one of the voices calling out to the others that this stage of the operations had been completed and objective secured. "Don't make owl noises at me," snapped Iris. It figured that they were all in on it, every one of them, right from the beginning. The only person who doesn't know the whole story, she thought irritably, is me. Just her luck, which, when she thought about it, had never really been the same since she had retired the Enesque replicant, as though that job had put some kind of convoluted Natch und Nebel curse on her. "You don't have to rub it in," she glared at the man guarding her. "I want to know when we're going to segue onto the next tune, and I get to talk to the guy in charge." The guard peered at her, as though at some unexpected biological specimen that had crawled out of the surrounding desolate area and into the shack. "And that would be—" "Jesus Christ," said Iris. "No, don't go with that. I don't want to confuse you. Urbenton, the director, or whatever the hell he's supposed to be." She could tell from the puzzled look in the man's eyes that she wasn't coming across. "Read my lips. Ben Ton." "I don't know who the hell you're talking about." The guard leaned back in his chair, tilting its front legs clear off the floor's splintery wooden planks, his arms folded across his chest. "I've never heard of anybody named Bourbonton." Iris didn't bother to correct him. Pointless, she thought. She'd handled enough interrogations during her cop career with suspects and perps both dumber and smarter than this guy to know when things had reached a dead end. Either the guy really didn't know, in which case she was wasting her time by even asking, or he had been trained well enough to put up a convincing front, one that would take a long time to crack, plus the ability to beat the crap out of him, which was more or less standard LAPD procedure in situations like this. She doubted if that much time was available to her, and she was sure that the other part wasn't, given that the guy was strapped with a big ugly piece in a shoulder holster, and she was weaponless. Her chair and his were far enough apart that if she tried anything cute, he would have plenty of time to unfold his arms, pull the gun out, and put its muzzle in her face before her butt was even off the curved metal seat beneath her. Try waiting, Iris told herself. For her, it was a novelty, but she couldn't see that any other options were available at the moment. "Thirsty?" The guard, unruffled by their exchange, pushed a plastic water bottle toward her with the toe of his boot. "I'll let you know," which wouldn't be long. The metal shack was already starting to heat up from the desert-like sun hammering down on it when she had been loaded into one of the spinners that had come hovering down on her. The first blood-red light of dawn had been starting to leak around the base of the surrounding buildings. As the spinner had risen and flown eastward, away from the black, mottled ocean, the radiance had changed to a brighter and dirtier orange, textured and smudged by the constant ground-hugging pollution that silted the lungs of every Angelino. Iris had spat out enough of it to know what the taste was like, waking in the middle of the night with the sensation that some invisible bedmate was sitting on her chest, hands tightening on her throat. That was the kind of repeating dream that came with the urban territory. So it didn't surprise her to see the black-brown inhalants lapping up against the low mountains that surrounded the dense city basin like the tide of derelict oil tankers. She turned and gazed out the single small window on one side of the shack, its lower left pane broken out, leaving one jagged triangle sticking up like a tooth. The rest of the window was too clouded with dust to see much, but through the hole she could make out a long vista of sand and scruffy, dried brown brush clinging precariously to the dunes' hollow slopes. Dead machinery populated the area right up to the distant limits of a sagging fence topped with rusting coils of razor wire. Most of the equipment looked like ancient earth-moving gear. Bulldozers with their shovel-like snouts scraped into the dry rock beneath the sand. Caterpillar treads snapped and draped off the giant metal gears. Saurian cranes, whose necks had been torn free of their sinews, their fanged scoops crashed down upon the little plastic windowed booths where the human operators had once sat a long time ago. Steamrollers, whose massive cylindrical wheels had become pitted with wind-driven gravel. Iris figured that the machines must have been used for road building, not city roads, but highways and freeways, back when there had still been open spaces anywhere near Los Angeles, before the metastasizing city had swallowed them up, oozing itself over them like some slowly and endlessly self-replicating unicellular organism. Metastasize. Spread to other sites in the body by metastasis.
Metastasizing.
Before the metastasizing city had swallowed them up, oozing itself over them like some slowly and endlessly self-replicating unicellular organism. Curious, passing time in the shack's heat and stilled air, she leaned to one side so she could look further along the rows of defunct equipment. Her guess had been right, confirmed by hodgepodge stacks of what had been the signs mounted over the freeways. She had seen photos of them in some historical video documentary, part of her perfunctory civics classwork at the LAPD's training academy. Dark green backgrounds with reflective white lettering, bright in the desert glare. It hurt her eyes to even look at them, squinting with the corners of her eyes watering. Iris could decipher the destinations spelled out on the old signs. Places like Pomona and Glendale, Riverside, and farther west to San Bernardino. Farther north to Ventura and Oxnard. Nothing but names now, without meaning or reference. Those places had been buried long ago, beneath the space-hungry city, which left no place to go to. Not really. That was the true distinguishing feature of Los Angeles. Every place in it was just like every other place. Something like the long-expected and even wished-for heat death of the universe had been achieved, with no place to go to that was any different from where someone had started from. Why go at all? Instead, there was the constant milling about of LA's street crowds, like the random Brownian motion of molecules in suspension, without purpose or order, or even sensation. Iris supposed that was a big part of the reason for the characteristic blank-faced apathy of LA citizens, and why she and other Blade Runners had always been able to run around in the streets with cannon-sized weaponry held aloft and blow away things that looked like real people, and that died just as gruesomely, without any of the bystanders getting the least bit disturbed by what they were witnessing. Someday, mused Iris, as she gazed out at the desert beyond the rusting machinery, someday they'll invent a mass void conf test, one that somebody can run on a whole city at once, and LA'll flunk it. She reached down and picked up the plastic water bottle, unscrewed the lid and drank, tilting her head to let the lukewarm liquid slide down her throat. She set the bottle down between herself and the guard. "So where's Vogel?" The guard gazed non-reactively at her. "Who?" Iris rolled her eyes toward the sheet metal ceiling of the shack. "You know," she said with forced patience. "Vogel, the guy you picked up with me." "That his name?" The guard shook his head. "We didn't bring anybody back here except you. The other person you were with, he got away, and we didn't bother to go chasing after him." "Yeah, right." Iris considered the guard's statement with sour disbelief. "Expect me to believe that? So why didn't you go after him?" The guard shrugged. "He's not important." With a nod, the guard indicated Iris sitting across from him. "You're important." "Thanks. That makes me feel better, all right." She turned again toward the bleak view outside the shack. A tight cell phone sounded its characteristic trill, muffled only by the leather of the guard's shoulder holster. As Iris watched, he dug beneath the holster and extracted the tiny device from his shirt pocket. "Balcom here." He listened for a moment, then nodded. "Got it." The phone went back where it had come from. "Let's go." Iris remained seated as the guard stood up. "Go where?" "Conference room." The guard gestured toward the shed's door, indicating some place beyond it. "Believe me, you'll like it better. It's got air conditioning." You got that right. Her cowboy shirt, dirty and torn from crawling through the various passages of the Tyrell Corporation ruins, was starting to stick to the skin over her ribs. She stood up. "Lead on, pal." As they were walking across the fenced compound toward a distant set of larger buildings shimmering in the heat, the guard dug into his jacket pocket and held out something to Iris. "Here," he said. I was told you could have this back now. Iris glanced at the familiar object in the guard's hand. Really? She was unimpressed. What good's an unloaded gun to me? The guard lifted an eyebrow at her, then halted. He raised the weapon and aimed it toward one of the ancient, half-buried bulldozers several meters away, then squeezed the trigger. The sound of the shot rolled out toward the distant, slate-colored hills, followed immediately by the bullet pinging against the bulldozer's concave scoop. Fresh, bright metal showed where the bullet had hit, knocking away layers of rust. "It's loaded," said the guard quietly, holding the gun out to Iris again. "I'll be damned." Iris stared at the gun, its black, checked grip pointing toward her, then took it from him. The gun's comforting weight filled her hand, like a portion of her own anatomy that had been magically restored to her. She could tell there was a full clip inside it, minus the one shot that had just been fired off. The guard continued walking, exposing his broad-shouldered back. A sweat stain darkened the area along his spine. "Wait a minute," Iris called to him. "Now what?" The guard stopped and looked back at her. "They're waiting for us." Iris leveled the gun at him. "What's stopping me from blowing your head off, finding a spinner, and leaving this cheap popsicle stand behind?" "Why would you want to do that?" The guard appeared genuinely puzzled. "You're among friends." He started walking again without looking back. After a moment, Iris lowered the gun and followed him. "Here you go." The guard pushed open a battered steel door at the front of the complex's largest building. Air seeped out, several degrees cooler than the stuff rising off the desert floor. "Make yourself comfortable." "I've been trying to." She walked into the empty room, hearing the door close behind her. She glanced over her shoulder and saw that the guard hadn't followed her in. It took a moment for her to realize that she wasn't alone in the space, and that there were other eyes watching her. She'd had her senses attuned for human presences. Somebody who wanted to talk to her, who wanted answers from her, and who she might, it was always possible, get answers from. So she wasn't ready for the owls. The surprise was enough that her hand actually darted toward the gun she had tucked into her jacket pocket, grabbing the checked metal grip and pulling the cold metal part way out before she realized what they were. Golden eyes, at least a dozen pairs of them, blinked and stared at her. Iris took a step back so she could get them all into view. She saw now that one wall of the room was studded with bare metal perches, slightly higher than her own head, on which the animals perched. There was a variety of sizes and appearances, as though some retail aviary had been transferred intact from the souk in downtown L.A. A couple of the owls were some pygmy breed, half the size of the others, but with the same sharp claws and predator's avidity. A couple had round faces, different in plumage from the rest of their bodies. One was almost pure white, with a few black flecks on its chest. Most of them were of the same goldenish brown, with black feathers as horns, as the one she had been pursuing for so long. For all she knew, one of the owls before her now might have been that elusive target. "You like them?" Iris turned and saw that someone else, as human as herself, had entered the room. Round-faced, elderly enough that the thinning fringe of hair brushed past his ears was completely white, infirm enough that he moved with the aid of the type of aluminum cane whose floor end sprouted a set of widely spaced rubber tips. Carefully balancing himself, he pushed the door closed, shutting out the harsh glare bouncing off the expanse of sand, then turned his smile toward her again. "They're okay, I guess." An odd, ill-formed memory tugged at her thoughts. It took a few seconds to remember exactly what it was. Nothing that had happened to her when she had been asking questions at the souk, or anything that had really happened to her at all. Instead, it was something from the movie Vogel had shown her inside the ruins of the old Tyrell Corporation headquarters. The bit where the cop Deckard first met the replicant Rachel. The first thing she'd said to him was to ask whether he liked the company owl, sitting on its perch in Eldon Tyrell's executive suite. And what had Deckard said to her? Iris couldn't remember the exact words. Some stupid question about whether the owl was real or not, as if that mattered. Iris glanced back at the array of owls. A few of them were settling their wings around themselves again, as though the sound of human voices had startled them from their sleep. "I wouldn't know one kind from another, though." She gave a small shrug. "It's not exactly a topic I'm keen on." "So I understand." The elderly man gimped his way farther into the room, extending the multi-footed cane, and then dragging himself along after it. "We know all about you. Iris, isn't it?" He smiled at her with teeth turned translucent with age, as he passed slowly before her. "You may call me Karsten, if you like." "Why?" She stood with hands on her hips, watching him. "Is it your name?" "Oh, very cop-like of you, I'm sure." He radiated a twinkly, grandfatherish persona. "Young ladies shouldn't go into your line of work. It turns them cynical." "Wrong. I was cynical before I became a cop." "You're the exception, then." Karsten didn't look at her, but stood directly in front of the owls, both of his gnarled and brown-spotted hands folded on the cane's rubber grip. He gazed upward, as if admiring the birds. "But then, that's something else we do, in fact, know about you. That some things that are for other people either optional, that is a matter of choice for them, or the results of their formative experiences, are not so for one such as yourself." He glanced over his shoulder at her. "As you've indicated on more than one occasion, you started out this way." "Christ, I don't even know what you're talking about." Iris was beginning to think this was the essential element of the obscure, infuriating curse that had been laid on her. Since the replicant Anesk's death, everyone she encountered seemed to talk in riddles, weirdly profound on the surface, but balloon empty once the words had been peeled away. "Like they're trying," she thought irritably, "to screw with my head." For what purpose, she hadn't yet been able to determine. "Look, why don't you just tell me what you want from me?" "Want from you?" The notion seemed to amuse the elderly figure. His smile with its worn-looking teeth grew wider. "Why should anyone want something from you? That would indicate that you have something.
Do you?
Only this. She took the gun from her jacket pocket and held it up. Maybe I haven't used it enough. If you know what I mean.
I can guess.
Unruffled, Karsten returned to admiring the owls arrayed on their perches.
This is undoubtedly another characteristic of your unfortunate profession. If you cannot figure out what you need to know in the sense of determining the answers to your many questions, you believe you can force them to be produced. You can put your weapon to someone's head, and then that person will tell you both what is true and what is necessary, which of course are not always the same thing, are they?
I'd settle for either one at this point.
The moderation of one's desires, said Karsten, is the point at which wisdom commences. Come here, sweetheart.
He was no longer speaking to Iris, but to one of the owls perched in front of him. A russet brown specimen extended its wings and flapped audibly down to Karsten's extended arm. Iris saw now that none of the owls was chained or otherwise fastened to the metal extension on which it sat.
There's a good girl.
Holding one arm level, he stroked the owl's head with his other hand. The sleeve of his old-fashioned tweed jacket had no apparent padding or leather protection. The owl somehow managed to keep its sharp claws from penetrating the rough fabric and the skin inside, as though even its inadvertent potential for harm had been tamed away.
Life's not so bad here, is it?
Karsten glanced at Iris, standing behind him.
They can be very difficult creatures to maintain in captivity. They're sensitive to all sorts of conditions. Humidity, degrees of light exposure, that sort of thing. But it can be done.
If you know what you're doing, I suppose. Iris watched as the old man took from his jacket pocket a small plastic bag filled with scraps of meat. He transferred the bag to his other hand, then extracted the wet red bits from it and fed them one by one to the owl on his arm. The other owls regarded the process with keen interest, some of them part way flapping their wings, others shuffling back and forth on their metal perches. I never took care of an animal. I mean, like a pet or something. I had a chat for a while, until somebody messed with it. But that's not the same thing. They're designed to be low maintenance.
Not at all the same thing, agreed Karsten,
feeding another scrap to the owl.
Plus, a living creature reacts to stimuli in its own way. They can be unpredictable, even the simplest of them. These, he nodded toward the golden-eyed birds, are still essentially wild. They can never be truly domesticated.
His fragile visage seemed both sad and well-informed.
At best, you could say that I've reached a certain understanding with them. They refrain from drawing my blood. They do so now, at least. It took a while, and quite a few scars before we reached that point. And in turn, they get the little tidbits they deserve.
Then they're lucky.
No, just smart, said Karsten. Or smart enough. Smarter than human beings, at any rate. Smarter than you.
Maybe so. Iris watched the owl take another scrap from the tips of the old man's fingers. You don't have to rub it in, though.
It's not meant to hurt, but to motivate. There are things you want to know. Why not ask the questions?
Asking questions, said Iris. is what's gotten me into this much trouble.
Only because you didn't ask enough of them, or not the right ones. People so rarely do.
Karsten slid the plastic bag into his jacket pocket. With an empty hand, tossing gesture of his arm, he sent the owl flapping back to its perch.
But that's the chance you're getting now. So go ahead. Ask whatever is on your mind.
All right. Iris looked from him to the owls, then back again. Any of these scrappy?
Pardon?
I'm not asking about their dispositions, their names. What I want to know is if any of these owls is named Scrappy.
Ah, Karsten nodded. As in Scrappy, the owl that at one time belonged to the Tyrell Corporation, and to Eldon Tyrell in particular.
That's the one.
A worthwhile inquiry, said Karsten, given the amount of trouble to which you've gone to find that particular owl. Unfortunately, and not just for you, none of the owls you see here before you is in fact the one Dr. Tyrell so amusingly named Scrappy. And let me answer your next question before you ask it. The owl you've been seeking has indeed never been here at our facility, as much as we would wish it otherwise.
Iris mulled over the old man's words. As far as she could determine, he was telling the truth. Even though at least a couple of the owls, including the one he just fed, looked like the one she'd been sent to find. She wasn't enough of a bird expert to make a specific ID call, and the elusive Scrappy hadn't been in her possession long enough for her to have memorized any particular key feature, except for it having been wild with a chain attached to its banded foot to keep it from escaping. The ones here were conspicuously free of any such tether. As Karsten had claimed, they might not be exactly domesticated, but they had no inclination not to hang around and get their bloody treats hand-fed to them. Okay, there had at least been one item of interest in what this Karsten person had told her. So I take it that you people out here are the ones who wanted to find Tyrell's owl? I mean the ones who really wanted to, and not just some front organization.
Of course we wanted to find it.
Karsten fastidiously deaned his reddened fingertips with the handkerchief he'd taken from his jacket's inside pocket.
But then, that is not an exclusive characteristic of our little group. There are others besides ourselves who would like to have possession of that same animal.
Maybe, Iris thought to herself. At this point, she wasn't prepared to believe even that much. For all I know, there's only one organization, or maybe only one person who wants the thing, and all the others were fronts for that mysterious entity. She spoke her next words aloud. Like who?
Oh, many.
Karsten's frail shoulders lifted in a shrug.
You'd be surprised, I'm sure, if I were to give you an exhaustive list of everyone who is interested in the same thing. The owl that you and I are, or who have been in the past. It's an item of a considerable value, worth going to great lengths to acquire, I assure you.
Why? What's so valuable about it?
There now,
the old man nodded in obvious appreciation.
That's the important question, isn't it? The question you should have ascertained the answer to before you started out on this so troublesome quest. Why is always more important than who or where, inasmuch as to know the why of something is to know in potentia all the other questions and answers as well.
The other part of the curse, these weird-ass lectures. Iris hoped she wasn't going to have to sit through another sermon like the kind Vogel and the others had gotten into the habit of laying on her. "All right," said Iris. "Same question then. What's so valuable about Tyrell's owl?" Karsten gave a slow shake of his head.
That's not an easy question to answer.
I was afraid of that. Somehow I just knew I was going to get jerked around about this. Again.
Not at all.
Karsten's tone was both mild and amused.
Your cop-type cynicism is getting the better of you. Though, of course, given recent events in your life, I can well understand why that would be. Still, you should make an effort not to become embittered. It's not an attitude that suits you very well, considering the remarkable things that are in store for you.
What? Iris gazed at him in perplexed amazement. You gotta be kidding. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She could hear a couple of the owls on their perches, flapping their wings in alarm as her voice rose. If there's more in store for me, I don't want to know what it is. I've already gotten canned from my job, which I loved, and I don't even need you telling me what was so wrong about it. Plus, before that, I wound up getting my brain fritz from a hot-wired chat, which I was also fond of, and woke up in the police department hospital, which I was never happy about. And all that was before I got dragged through the Tyrell Corporation ruins. She knew she was stoking her rage higher and didn't care. Let's not even go into what your bunch did to get me here. If all you wanted to do was have a chat like the others I've had recently, all of which didn't tell me a damn thing, and show off your bird collection, next time, Iris jabbed her finger at the old man, next time, just mail me your invitation.
Really?
None of her angry words had disturbed Karsten's placid demeanor.
And if I had, would you have accepted it? I think not. Please.
He extended a small, softly pink hand toward her.
Why don't we start over? As if you had just walked through the door, having come here of your own volition.
That'd be the day.
Perhaps so.
Karsten gave another small shrug.
I admit, such would have required a prescient amount of wisdom on your part. We can't really expect that from other people, can we? So let's pretend that you had been smart enough to have done so.
Under his grandfatherly mannerisms, a layer of steel was discernible. His small eyes didn't so much twinkle as glint with the edge of an instrument, sharp enough to slice through another's tough demeanor.
Look, there's coffee here.
He gestured toward a table at the side of the room.
Real coffee. Not any of that ersatzoid stuff. Those industrial byproducts they sell from those street stalls will eat a hole in your lower intestine.
You're right about that, said Iris. She knew a bunch of retired cops who'd gotten into the bad habit, when they'd still been on the force, of parking their spinners alongside one of those cheap xenoglot operations and draining a quart-sized polystyrene cup full of hyper-caffeinated junk simply to get through a couple of end-to-end shifts. They'd all wound up with colostomy bags in addition to their major league Wombog curve mood swings.
Very expensive, of course, and just for you. We wouldn't do it for anyone. Believe me, we have to work within our budget constraints. Unlike your former employers, we have to depend upon our own private sources of operational funds. Come on.
Costin led her toward the table, where he poured out a cup from a thermal carafe. He handed it to her, then pointed to the other articles on the table.
And surely you must be hungry after all that expenditure of energy and in the cold and damp, you poor thing. At the Tyrell Corporation ruins. Please help yourself. That's what it's for.
Iris realized that she did feel both hungry and tired. The slight ebb of her anger had been produced by the old man's hospitality, however phony, enough to have exposed that pure adrenaline and temper had been keeping her going. She took the plate Karsten handed her, then watched as he deposited a jelly donut on it. That's such a cliché. She shook her head.
My apologies.
Karsten seemed genuinely apologetic.
No simple cop inferences intended, but as I said, our resources are limited. And this, he turned, gesturing at the building's interior, this is only a temporary setup, provisional. We'll be here only as long as we need to be in order to get the job done. So we haven't established a proper kitchen. There aren't very many of us, and we can get by for the time being without one.
Iris took a bite. Who's this we? She swallowed. Who are you people?
Another good question. Karsten nodded approvingly. You're getting better at this. Someday, his voice faded, almost to a whisper. Someday you'll know exactly the right question to ask. And then, he brought the gaze of his small, pale eyes around to her again, from whatever interior focal point it had fallen to. Then you'll have to decide whether to ask it or not. She froze in place between heartbeats and the tiny, almost silent motions of the old-fashioned, numbered clock on the room's wall. A red, vicious trinkle from the half-eaten donut inched slowly down the inside of her wrist. Don't be frightened, said Karsten gently. You might be lucky. That moment might never come.
Frightened. She could remember when the same fear had touched her before, that it had brought tears, a bout of weeping of which she was no longer ashamed, because she knew now that she had been right to be frightened. She did look exactly like me, thought Iris. The memory of that image of the woman's face, the replicant named Rachel, filled the screen behind her eyes. There had been a question then as well, that she could have asked, but hadn't, because she had been too afraid to. Her hand came to her mouth automatically, and she took another bite of the donut. She didn't want Carson, whoever he was, to know how his words and her memory had scared her. Her mouth had gone so dry she could barely swallow.
Drink your coffee.
Karsten had noticed her effort, close to choking.
That'll help.
She obeyed. She could feel her pulse starting up again.
Could you unfold this for me?
Karsten had pulled out a metal chair, like the ones that Iris and the guard had sat on in the other building.
The joints are a bit rusty, like mine, I suppose.
The simulated twinkle appeared in his eyes again, as though they were some sort of cheaply artificial gemstone.
And the other one as well. We might as well make ourselves comfortable. We have a lot to talk about.
Iris set the chairs on either side of the table. She and Karsten sat down, creakily in his case, with the thermal carafe between them.
You asked a question.
Karsten refilled her cup, then poured one for himself.
And as I indicated, one of the better ones available to you. So I feel duty-bound to answer it for you. I don't want you to think I'm wasting your time.
You wouldn't be the first, said Iris.
Ah, but with us, you and me, that is, it's different. I know how much time you have, and there isn't any to spare.
She drained the cup in one go, head tossed back, then set it down empty on the table. Go on.
You wanted to know who we are.
Karsten wrapped both his hands around his own cup, as though trying to warm his thin, elderly blood.
Our organization, such as it is, has no identifying name or other identifier. It's not even an organization, more of an amalgam or an ad hoc committee. Amalgam, a mixture or blend, combination.
Amalgam.
It's not even an organization, more of an amalgam or an ad hoc committee.
For a committee, you seem to have an awful lot of members. That was a pretty good-sized pack you had chasing me and Vogel through the Tyrell Corporation ruins.
Loyal employees, said Karsten, as with most of the people you might find here. You see, the committee, such as it is made up of the other organizations, companies, a few research labs, that had been involved in the design and production of so-called replicants before the Tyrell Corporation established its monopoly in that field.
Iris picked up her empty cup. There were other companies making replicants?
Several.
Karsten poured out a refill for her.
Suderman, Grozzy, in fact, the company for which I was the chief technical officer, Derain Essier, held several key patents, without which no viable replicants could be manufactured at all.
Wait a minute. I thought Eldon Tyrell invented the replicant technology.
All by himself? That's a good joke.
The faint smile on Crasten's face showed no trace of amusement.
Eldon Tyrell and the Tyrell Corporation certainly wanted other people to believe that. They put a lot of their public relations flax on the task of implanting that notion, and they largely succeeded. But then, they had help. The Tyrell Corporation didn't achieve its monopoly in the replicant trade on its own. They were essentially given the monopoly, or rather, it was stolen for them.
Who did that?
Ah, as the ancient Romans would have said, cui bono, who benefits? An excellent adage for helping determine the truth and the culprits.
Karsten sounded both bitter and sarcastic.
Obviously, the Tyrell Corporation benefited, but they weren't the ones who did it. They merely received the stolen goods into their hands, or rather, into Eldon Tyrell's hands. You'll have to excuse my personal animosity toward the man. Let's just say that I didn't shed any tears when I heard he had been killed by one of his own creations, the replicant known as Roy Batty.
I suppose, said Iris, he got what he deserved.
You could say that, and you'd be correct. The mill wheels of the gods grind slow, but they grind exceedingly fine.
A note of grim satisfaction sounded in Karsten's voice.
Someday, certain UN bureaucrats, the ones in charge of the emigration program, will get what they deserve as well. They were the ones that handed the replicant monopoly over to the Tyrell Corporation. Eldon Tyrell was simply their lackey, following their orders, doing what they wanted done. Tyrell might have thought differently, but then he was an egomaniac and a deluded one.
Iris sipped at the coffee. She looked over the cup's rim at Karsten. You're saying the UN was behind the Tyrell Corporation?
All the way.
The old man's temper had simmered down, but was still visibly present.
It could even be said that the Tyrell Corporation was nothing more than a puppet organization, a wholly controlled subsidiary of the UN emigration program. In return for his complete cooperation, Eldon Tyrell was handed all the profits from the replicant industry, which was of course considerably enhanced by the ramped-up production orders placed by the UN for those slave labor replicants given to the human emigrants. Something of a devil's bargain, I'm afraid, for poor Eldon. He became the master of the replicant industry, with all of his competitors eliminated, rather violently too, by the UN's elite special forces military units. I remember when the blue-helmeted squadrons arrived on my company's doorstep. It wasn't pretty.
The small, pale eyes in the old man's face seemed to cloud with memory.
And there weren't many of us that survived. Of the Darien executives at the home offices in Poitiers, I was the one that got out alive. I had to go underground and rebuild the corporation from our branch office personnel, or at least the ones I was able to get to before the blue helmets did. That took a long time, and there was a limit to how much we could accomplish, even in league with the other replicant designers and manufacturers who had emerged to survive the extermination process. Our little committee had its work cut out for it, just in trying to remain among the living. And all the while, Eldon Tyrell and the Tyrell Corporation were installed as the masters of the replicant industry. But as I said, at a price. Tyrell had the UN emigration program's leash around his neck from the beginning, and for an ego-driven type such as himself, that had to be galling.
I bet, said Iris. A thin smile showed on Karsten's face.
Perhaps Eldon Tyrell made the mistake of trying to remove that leash. He might have convinced himself that he and his corporation had become more powerful than the UN, or that he was somehow able to protect himself from its retribution for his disloyalty. And as we know, he was wrong about that.
Wait a minute. Iris warily regarded the old man sitting across the table from her. You're saying the UN was responsible for Eldon Tyrell's murder? That would mean that the Roy Batty replicant, The one who actually crushed Tyrell's skull was operating under UN orders?
Not at all. It's almost certain that the Roy Batty replicant was acting on its own personal agenda when it killed Eldon Tyrell. But at the same time, there are some, shall we say, suspicious circumstances about how Batty and the other replicants in his group of fugitives were able to both reach Earth and also penetrate the Tyrell Corporation security systems. At every step of the way, things were made oddly possible for the Batty group. Cui bono? If the UN immigration authorities wanted to eliminate an associate who had become too troublesome to maintain a relation with, they didn't have to send any blue-helmeted hit squad after him. That would have been a little bit too noticeable, even in a place such as LA. How much easier and more secretive, yet no less certain and fatal, to simply make sure that a killer such as the Roy Batty replicant was able to gain access to Tyrell.
You don't have any proof of that, though.
True.
Another shrug from the frail-looking shoulders.
You could even say that it might be no more than wishful thinking on my part. My personal animus toward the late Dr. Tyrell is no doubt apparent, but I'm hardly alone in having wanted him dead. He had made himself a lot of enemies, both human and otherwise, and Tyrell certainly had the kind of devious mind, devious for the sake of being devious, that wouldn't have been satisfied with his privileged position as industrial lackey to the UN emigration program. They might have had to eliminate him to short-circuit any number of schemes he could have cooked up. But as to absolute proof,
Karsten smiled.
Let's just say that I'm certainly older than one such as yourself. I might be at least a little wiser as well when it comes to the machinery of the universe.
Maybe. It was Iris's turn to shrug. She wasn't going to argue the point with him, and if Karsten had actually killed his old rival Tyrell himself, or had arranged for it to happen, and was now trying to foist the blame off onto the UN, it wasn't any of her concern. That hadn't been anything assigned to her, even while she had been with the department. So you've got your committee of all the companies that were screwed by the Tyrell Corporation? She gestured toward the old man with the rim of her cup. Now, what are you trying to accomplish? Get back into business? Seems like now would be a good time for it, given that the Tyrell Corporation seems to be pretty much defunct.
It's not that simple, said Karsten gloomily. Nothing ever is, even if the UN emigration authorities were aware of our existence, and we've gone to a lot of effort to make sure that they're not. They'd hardly be likely to turn the replicant industry back over to us. To do so would amount to revealing how they had attempted to wipe us out in the first place. That's something the UN itself, the administrative levels above the emigration program, might not even be aware of. There's every indication that the emigration program might, in fact, be a rogue element in the UN operating on its own initiative outside anyone else's oversight and control. They can only continue that way and avoid being brought back under administrative discipline if they keep secret the sort of illicit activities in which they've been engaged.
Karsten leaned across the table, his voice stripped down to utter seriousness.
The emigration authorities are in too deep to let the truth come out about how they enabled the Tyrell Corporation to take over the replicant industry. They would rather destroy that industry and even the emigration program itself before revealing that.
Iris didn't doubt the old man's analysis. It was an investigative truism. The cover-up, she told herself, is always worse than the original crime, especially in that it creates an endless cycle that got progressively more violent and ruthless as it spiraled downward, with one cover-up succeeding another to hide an original crime that became progressively smaller and less significant by comparison. "Okay," said Iris. "Same question then. What's the agenda? What do you guys want?"
In practical terms, very well.
Karsten laid his small, delicately manicured hands flat upon the table.
We want the owl.
I knew that was coming. The owl, huh? By which I take it you mean Eldon Tyrell's owl? Good old Scrappy? Karsten nodded.
Of course.
What's the matter with the ones you've got? Iris nodded toward the golden-eyed birds perched on the opposite wall. Or are you trying to complete a full set?
Very amusing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them at all. They are indeed very valuable creatures, in many ways, and not just on the open market, where such things are prized for their rarity.
Karsten turned his gaze from her and regarded the owls. Some of them had closed their eyes, as though in apparent sleep. The others looked back at him without blinking.
They have a specific and unique value to the committee of which I am a part. But the owl named Scrappy, Tyrell's owl for which you have been so assiduously hunting.
Assiduously, with great care and perseverance. Assiduously.
They have a specific and unique value to the committee of which I am a part. But the owl named Scrappy, Tyrell's owl, for which you have been so assiduously hunting, has an even greater, though similar, value.
Which is?
Well done, Karsten nodded in approval. You're definitely getting the hang of it, of asking the right questions, that is. You're doing very well. When you know specifically why the owl in question is so valuable to us, you'll have gone a great way toward answering a lot of the puzzles facing you.
That's why I asked. Iris helped herself to more coffee from the carafe. There was only enough left to half fill the cup. Not that I expected a straight answer or anything.
That's where you're wrong, said Karsten. Everything has been arranged, at great effort, I might say, just so you'd be given that straight answer. As much as it is important to you that you find out these things, it is equally important to us that it be made possible for you to find them out.
Iris had had enough coffee. She could feel the familiar and comforting jittering caffeine buzz down through her arms and into her hands as she pushed the cup away from herself. "Prove it," she said.
As you wish.
Karsten stood up from the table.
Follow me.